Hello Malcolm, welcome to my video on the muscles and ligaments of the lower leg and ankle. You'll have to bear with the music I've decided to put on because there is a small to medium sized dog in my backyard who has taken it upon himself to decide to try and bark himself to death, much to my chagrin. So I've put on a little bit of music. I hope it is not of hindrance to our discussion. Anywho, so the muscles of the lower leg, we'll start there. They come in 4 different compartments, which I think we might have discussed last time. The first of which that we'll cover is the anterior compartment, because I have a little illustration of the anterior side of the leg drawn. So anterior compartment contains 3 main muscles, one that's, kind of shaky. I'll explain that in a second. First we have tibialis anterior. I wonder if you can hear the dog barking. Second, we have extensor digitorum. Then we have extensor hallucis longus. And then there's a bigger dog that starts barking at the smaller dog. I'm assuming telling him to try to shut up, but it doesn't work. They just keep going. It's great. So, now, whenever we look at it within cadaver anatomy, my script for this play is Gray's Anatomy, the 1901 edition, which you can find I found this one for $8 at a used bookstore. Pretty cheap, and anatomy doesn't really change too much. It's good for basic musculoskeletal anatomy, at least I think. So, start with doing a little bit of illustration action. So, if we're looking at, again, the anterior aspect of the leg, you would usually see the interosseous membrane connecting the tibia and the fibula with a little bit of a window at the top. From the back, you would see the popliteal artery that would give rise to an anterior tibial artery and continue as the posterior tibial artery in the back. The posterior tibial artery would shoot off the fibular artery, and that's where the blood supply for these 3 compartments comes from. But we're keeping this discussion to the muscles for now. So the first muscle, the most medial of them, the most prominent from the front is going to be your tibialis anterior. So, you have to bear with me, I'm just kind of drawing this on the fly. Sort of something like that. And it throws its tendon kind of down here. I'll throw up a muscle chart in a second. After a bit, we'll kind of summarize everything. But I think it's kind of helpful to get a little bit of illustration stuff going too. Next, all right, so extensor hallucis is a long one. It kind of originates down here, more distal, and in between tibialis anterior and this one, extensor digitorum. I don't know if this is even helpful. If this is, like, if you're close enough to see as I'm drawing it. We'll be right back. After reviewing the playback footage, I've decided I think it looks pretty alright. As far as, I think you can see it on the video okay. At least I hope so. If this doesn't work, we'll try something else next time. Okay, so those are the 3 muscles of the anterior compartment. But I did mention there was like a 4th one that's kind of shaky, and that's because that 4th one is peroneus tertius or fibularis tertius. So fibularis tertius, it's kind of named the same as the other muscles in the fibular compartment, which we're going to get to after this. Fibularis tertius takes its name because it kind of, in Gray's in the book, which I'll send the scanned pages of this section so that way you can have them to read yourself, because I think they're pretty well written. Talks about how fibularis tertius, I'll just call it that, it kind of looks like a little continuation of extensor digitorum. It takes its origin here on the distal fibula, and it sort of comes, where does that little guy insert? It looks like it just kind of takes up sort of a broad insertion here on some of the more lateral tarsals. Again, I'll get you a more defined origin and insertion. I'll type up a muscle sheet in an Excel doc and send it to you. But for now, this is just kind of getting the idea of their general layout. I wish I had more colored markers. I had like 10 different colors and I lost them. I don't know how. Real bummer. Okay, so that covers the muscles of the anterior compartment. So, all right, Malcolm, the dogs are still going at it. They're going at it more crazy than ever, and I'm gonna keep going at it more crazy than ever because I love anatomy this much, yes. And Malcolm, what if I told you that I lied to you? I lied to you because I said we were gonna go to the lateral compartment. No. Henry Gray had a different thing in mind when he was writing this book because he went to the superficial deep compartment first, or excuse me, the superficial posterior compartment first, which is where we're gonna go. We're gonna go there because that's the order that the illustrations go in the book. And I'm a copycat. I'm just kind of copying the illustrations. All right, so let's see here. There are 3 muscles to speak of in the superficial posterior compartment. 3 muscles. So the first one is going to be probably our most familiar one. They sort of come as a pair, the gastrocnemius. There's a medial and a lateral head. We have a weird one called the plantaris. It's disappointing. I'm not a fan of this muscle. And soleus. All right, so gastrocnemius. Actually, I'll start with our deepest muscle of the 3. So I because they are layered. That's going to make drawing this a little bit more tough. So first, we have the soleus, which takes up this just kind of all over. It's a real broad origin up across a lot of the tibia. And, so it does take up an origin from both the head of the fibula and over here across the tibia, comes down here, and as we'll see, these 3 muscles come together in a conjoint tendon to form the Achilles tendon, which inserts all 3 of them on the calcaneus bone, which is one of the talus bones. Not one of the talus bones, one of the tarsal bones of the ankle. I ran out of real estate down here, so I couldn't really draw it, but you get the point. We'll get to it. All right, so that's soleus. Number 2, we'll talk about the gastroc heads. So these ones, they actually originate on the medial and lateral femoral condyles, meaning that gastrocnemius is actually a biarticulate muscle. Why, do you ask? That is because it crosses both the knee joint and what would be the subtalar joint down here, the tibiofibular, the ankle joint. We'll just call it one joint for now. Because I'm sure you guys have started to discuss how the ankle joint is made up of a whole bunch of different joints, which we'll get to that in a second. Quite a few seconds. Besides the point, all right, gastrocnemius comes down here. They, again, kind of form this conjoint tendon along with the soleus and insert into the calcaneus. Third of these is the plantaris. So, remember the linea aspera, right? The linea aspera was a bony landmark on the posterior shaft of the femur, and it was this bony ridge that goes up the back of your femur, and the origin of your vastus medialis and vastus lateralis, they wrap around. Anywho, that's from the whole thigh discussion, but now we're talking about the lower leg. So, this is where plantaris is kind of weird. Plantaris is biarticulate too. It has this really sort of proximal origin, and then it tapers off to this real thin tendon that joins the other 2 in the Achilles tendon. People call the plantaris tendon the fool's nerve. Why do they call it that, you may ask? That is because it is it just kind of looks like a nerve. And you wouldn't really expect to see a tendon that's this long. It spans quite literally like the entire lower leg. It can easily be mistaken for the sural nerve, which is a subcutaneous sensory nerve that supplies the posterior aspect of the leg. It can be mistaken for a lot of stuff. The one key distinguishing factor with the plantaris tendon is that it inserts into the Achilles. It inserts into the calcaneus along with the rest of the Achilles tendon. All right, so that covers our three muscles of the superficial posterior compartment. Next, deep posterior compartment. Next to last compartment, compartment number 3, we're covering the deep posterior compartment of the lower leg. This dude has three different muscles being tibialis posterior, flexor digitorum, and flexor hallucis longus. Some people say you don't even say the H, it's hallucis, like because British people, flexor hallucis longus, you know. However you want to pronounce it, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. All right. Tibialis digitorum hallucis. Tom, Dick, and Harry Potter. Now, so this describes the orientation of these three muscles from anterior to posterior as they wrap around the medial malleolus to enter the foot. That was a mouthful, but let me explain. So probably the deepest of the deep posterior compartment muscles is the tibialis posterior. You can remember this because tibia is in its name, you know, it rides right on the tibia, ride or die. And so it goes up and it kind of goes around first. Old Tom, tibialis posterior. Next goes flexor digitorum. So let me look here at my picture. All right, so flexor digitorum sort of takes on a more medial origin, honestly. And it sort of, if you look at it, it's an interesting orientation in the lower leg, and it takes a good bit of getting used to because the tendons almost sort of switch. So flexor digitorum comes, sorry, I got this whiteboard from Goodwill kind of cheap, and it's got a couple dents and cracks in it. It makes drawing smooth lines a little difficult at times. Makes speaking kind of hard at times too, jeez. All right, so the most, I wish I had more colors. I apologize for this. But most anterior tendon going around the medial malleolus is the tibialis posterior tendon. The next one back is that of flexor digitorum, which comes up here, kind of sits a little bit more medially and a little bit more superficially, a little bit riding over top of the muscle belly of tibialis posterior, just a little bit. Next time you're in the cadaver lab, pay some real close attention to this layering. You'll see what I mean. And then the last one that we'll talk about is, it's fine, is, flexor hallucis longus. Yep. There, finally got it out. Goodness. That comes in last. And this one has an interesting origin because it kind of sits over maybe a little bit of the interosseous membrane, but a much more lateral origin nonetheless. Over here on the fibula, tapers off again to a sort of a long tendon that wraps around the medial malleolus, your medial part of your ankle, and goes down into the foot. So again, I'm going to write this down. This is the tendons from anterior to posterior. Honestly, I'm just going to draw a separate picture to kind of clarify that a little bit because this picture is a little dookie. Okay, be right back. Whoa, I'm back. And I'm shorter. It's because I'm on my knees. I didn't actually get shorter. So this is what I mean by Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's tendons from anterior to posterior as they wrap around the medial malleolus. This is a medial to lateral view of the inside of somebody's leg. Sort of, it's not complete. So you can imagine that the muscles of the deep posterior compartment are all kind of sitting right here, right? So the first one we have wrapping around is going to be the deepest and probably the most broad origin having of the three is tibialis posterior. It comes and wraps around first, and it kind of comes around here to the bottom of the foot. Next, we have flexor digitorum. That one is the one that we said had sort of a more medial origin a little bit, sort of overrode on top of, a little bit more superficial, if you would, than tibialis posterior. And it would wrap around and join it here as well. Flexor digitorum would, of course, go to the phalanges. I'm actually not sure which bone. Again, I'll put that. I'll try to get you a good detailed muscle chart that describes the origin insertion. All right, last one is flexor hallucis longus, which is the one that takes that more lateral origin, so I don't really think we'd be able to see it, but it comes down and it joins the other two. It comes down here, and of course it would go right up to, again, the first phalange somewhere. I don't know. I'm not quite sure which one. I'm a little bit rusty myself, so it is okay. We're all learning here. So that was deep posterior compartment. Now we're finally on to the lateral compartment. Here we go. Alrighty. So luckily for us, there's only really two muscles to speak of in the lateral compartment of the lower leg. They are fibularis longus and fibularis brevis. Ooh. Remember, there was also a fibularis tertius, but that was often considered a part of the anterior compartment. Sometimes considered to actually just be an extension or extradigitation of the extensor digitorum. There it is. Holy cow. It's, what time is it? Oh my goodness, it's only 7:45. I'm getting sleepy already. That's absurd. Just kidding. I'm amped. So, distracted myself. All right, so fibularis longus, fibularis brevis. So let's imagine that we're drawing the lateral malleolus that would make this bone the fibula, and then behind it we would kind of have the tibia and something like that, I guess. So fibularis longus, fibularis tertius, they exist sort of on the more, just kind of chill out here. Of course, fibularis longus really takes up a much more, ooh, I'm not using my right color marker. Darn it, Christian, what the heck? So, I'm never doing that again, using my name in the third person. I didn't like that. Tried something new, didn't like it. Moving on. All right, so kind of like how the muscles of the deep posterior compartment wrapped around the medial malleolus, the muscles of the fibular or lateral compartment wrap around the lateral malleolus. So keep that in the back, in the front of your brain. Don't keep it in the back of your brain. You want to know this stuff. So yes, both of these muscles tendons wrap around the lateral malleolus. And we'll discuss the destination of fibularis longus's tendon first, because that's what we were talking about to begin with. Duh. So what it does, it wraps around the medial malleolus, the lateral malleolus. It's wrapping around the lateral malleolus of the fibula. I can't even get it up there. Sort of like this. And it goes over around the bottom of the foot. Here, I'm going to show you. So imagine this is your foot, and this is the lateral side of it, and this is the ankle. Here's the tendon, and it comes up, and it's going to go over here to the medial side, to the base of your first metatarsal. First metatarsal. What is it doing all the way over there? Heck if I know, but it engages in some of that plantar flexion, and then also some eversion, because, well, if you can imagine this muscle on the lateral side of your leg going underneath your foot to then the medial side of your foot. I can't get my leg up that high to show it, but you can imagine the motion it would do. Alrighty, so then I'll kind of keep this model here. Next we have fibularis brevis, which is kind of a whole lot. Doesn't extend up as proximally up the fibular shaft, and then it wraps also around the lateral malleolus, but then it inserts on, wow, this is not a very good model, inserts on the base of the fifth metatarsal. And so something to be aware of whenever you see really severe lateral ankle sprains is that the fibularis brevis tendon has allegedly been known to avulse along with a piece of the base of the fifth metatarsal, resulting in a avulsion fracture. Anywho, I'm not a doctor. I don't know if that actually happens, but people always bring it up, including like doctors. I don't want to pin that on a doctor. Anywho, moving on. Yes, those are the muscles of the lateral compartment. Covered all the compartments. I'm going to show you a couple more things, and then we'll move on to talk about some ligaments of the ankle. All right, a couple of things I wanted to wrap up on the lower leg stuff with. So this is a cross section of the lower leg, showing the 4 different compartments that we just talked about: the anterior compartment, the deep posterior compartment, superficial posterior compartment, and the lateral compartment. Can't even read my own handwriting sometimes. These 2 brown things are the tibia and the fibula, meaning that this would be a cross section if we're looking from the top down, a left leg. Obviously this would be posterior aspect, and this would be the anterior aspect. With that here being lateral, and then here being medial. Alright, so now that we have that established, I want to kind of show the positioning and layering of some of the vessels and nerves and how they relate to all of this, starting from the most superficial. So 2 things we have to talk about are out here. We have 2 things. Tell you what, I'll do the nerves in this weird murky clay color, and I'll do vessels in this black color. So this is going to be our small, our small saphenous vein. Don't confuse this with the great saphenous vein, which I don't know if you guys have discussed this in cadaver anatomy. This lies in the medial aspect of the leg. It starts up here, it emerges from the femoral vein, it emerges from the femoral sheath, and then kind of goes down the medial thigh, down the medial leg, and it is often a vessel that is harvested for coronary artery bypass grafts or CABG procedures, which are done in order to circumvent coronary artery blockages. Kind of helps to prevent heart attacks or to help to treat, symptoms of acute MI. Anywho, they take a vessel like this and they just kind of make a little bypass. They go around the problem. All right, so that's the small saphenous vein. I don't really know where it originates from. We'll be right back. And we're back. According to my quick Google search, the small saphenous vein arises from a popliteal vein. So it arises more around the knee level in the leg, whereas the great saphenous vein, the longer of the 2, originates more proximally in the thigh. All right, so then this nerve here, this is going to be this is actually just the sural nerve. So much shows how much I know about the sural nerve. It's still important. This is an important sensory nerve for the posterior aspect of your lower leg. Honestly, it's showing me I need to do some review of my own on it. We'll get back to that one. Anywho, just want you to be aware that it's here and that it is superficial to all these muscles that we were talking about. It's not down here deep with what we're going to talk about later exists in there. The anterior tibial artery, the posterior tibial artery, the superficial fibular nerve, deep fibular nerve, and the tibial nerve. They're all located, much deeper in here, and we'll get into that in a second. All right, so some of the things we mentioned earlier. We have the great saphenous vein. And the medial cutaneous nerve of the leg. that is over here. Sorry, bud, you gotta move. And again, these are all superficial to all the stuff going on the inside of the leg. So just wanted to point that out, make that clear. So both the anterior and posterior tibial artery kind of chill here on the interosseous membrane. So interosseous membrane pretty much separates the anterior and posterior tibial artery. And then we also have the superficial fibular nerve. And an important thing I want to take away from this is that the deep posterior and superficial compartments are both supplied by the tibial nerve. The tibial nerve and the posterior tibial artery. The lateral compartment is supplied by the fibular artery and the superficial fibular nerve. And then the anterior compartment is supplied by the anterior tibial artery and the deep fibular nerve. All right. So that can be used for any of the muscles in any of these compartments. And this can be used as a guide to tell you what is going to innervate them. So you should know that, let's talk about tibialis posterior, a member of the deep posterior compartment of the lower leg. It's not innervated by, if you saw this on a multiple choice exam, it's not innervated by the sural nerve because you know that this is a sensory nerve that is subcutaneous. It's more superficial to any of these. It doesn't even reside in the same fascia compartment. We would know that it resides in the deep posterior compartment and therefore it is supplied by the the tibial nerve. Same thing goes for gastrocnemius, and plantar teres is one of those ones I might have to double check on because it originates kind of proximally, relatively on the femur. I'll have to double check again. I will get you those details in a nice muscle sheet on a spreadsheet or something. We'll get it figured out one thing at a time. All right, let's talk about the ankle for a minute. All right, as you can see, this discussion I have titled the ankle. Joints and ligaments. It's because the ankle is made up of a few different joints. I'll show you exactly here what I mean. So I'm going to start off by drawing, as usual, a dang old tibia. Dang old tibia. Man, dang old tibia. Medium malleolus. And a dang old fibula. Lateral malleolus. I guess pretty exaggerated, but you get the point. So the first joint that we're going to talk about is the tibiofibular joint. You're probably wondering, Christian, where's the joint at? Remember, a joint is always just an interface between any two bones. The tibiofibular joint and as you'll see with your forearm as well, it's kind of a homologue to the upper body in a way, where there's a proximal and a distal tibiofibular joint. Of course, the motion about these two joints is not as pronounced as it is in the upper body with our motions like pronation and supination. Of course, we have pronation and supination of the foot, so we do still have some of that motion, but again, we don't talk about it quite as much. Again, so tibiofibular joints. Just that way, we don't get confused when we hear about some of these other joints. All right, so the next joint we're going to talk about is, this involves these two. I should mention kind of some word stuff. Crus or crural refers to the lower leg. And so this joint that consists of the talus one of our, the word's not coming to me, help, tarsals. Talus is one of our tarsals, there it is. This joint involves our talus and both the fibula and the tibia, and therefore we call it the talocrural joint. Talocrural joint. You might be wondering why we have to separate the ankle into all these joints. Well, anatomically, it's just because, there's so many different bones, goodness, I can't talk anymore. There's so many different bones that articulate on so many different other bones. All right, so we have the talocrural joint, and then, believe it or not, there's even one more. That was a poorly drawn calcaneus, but hey, you get the point. It's a talocrural joint is this one, and then because this one occurs beneath the talus, we call this the subtalar joint. It occurs between the talus and the calcaneus bones. All right, so we have our players. Now, what actions occur at these different joints? At the talocrural joint, we have the actions of dorsiflexion and plantar flexion. And the reason for that being is the lateral and medial malleoli, they don't really allow for any kind of inversion or eversion. That is what occurs at the subtalar joint. Inversion or eversion. There's nuance to it. Of course, there's going to be fractions of degrees. Of course, there's going to be varying amounts of degrees of any sort of motion that occurs at any joints between any two people. Motion is relative. No, I'm not Einstein, but I am a human, and every human's built a little bit differently. And so it's, to say truthfully that no inversion or eversion occurs at the talocrural joint, I don't know how accurate that is, but these are the main actions that occur at these joints. Just, again, wanted to clarify that. I don't speak in absolutes. Science doesn't speak in absolutes. All right, and then the tibiofibular joints, I wouldn't really say that there is any kind of action that occurs at those joints, at least not that I'm aware of. I could be wrong. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not God. All right, so we talked about those joints. Next, let's talk about a couple ligaments. All right, so we're going to start off by talking about the lateral ankle ligaments. Lateral ankle ligaments. There's really only three. We have our ATFL, CFL, and PTFL. Whoops. FL. They're all fibular ligaments. So that means they all take up attachment at the fibula. All right, so let's go ahead and draw this. We're looking here at a lateral ankle. This is the lateral malleolus. And then let's draw sort of like a talus underneath there, right? We have our calcaneus. We also have let me think what's on the medial aspect of our tarsal bones. We have our navicular, and then we have our cuboid, and then we have our medial, lateral, and middle cuneiforms, I believe. I'm a little bit rusty on those, but good thing we don't even have to talk about all those in the discussion of the lateral ankle joints, because again, there's only three, and they all involve the fibula. And wouldn't you also know, two of them involve the talus, the anterior talofibular ligament and the posterior talofibular ligament. Let me write that down up here. All right. So we're here at the fibula. Our anterior talofibular ligament is going to come down here. And it's just going to attach and stabilize this joint. And it stabilizes between the fibula and the talus. Next is the posterior talofibular ligament. Just runs posterior, and it also attaches to the talus. Not too difficult, not too tough. And lastly, we have the calcaneofibular ligament. Calcaneofibular ligament. And this one goes right down off the tip and goes down here to the calcaneus. And so, as you can imagine, in a lateral ankle sprain, which a lot of them involve that inversion as well as some plantar flexion. Plantar flexion more so involves the ATFL. Dorsiflexion more involves the PTFL. And then, the CFL is kind of in the middle. And you can just sort of imagine that because of the relationship, the direction that these ligaments run relative to the joints that they're stabilizing motion at. Think about how at the talocrural joint between the tibia and fibula and the talus, that's where our plantar flexion and dorsiflexion are happening. And so you can imagine that PTFL in the back is going to get a little bit tighter if we're up here like this. If this calcaneus is shifted, imagine if that's where the heel of my palm is. And then the ATFL will get a little bit tighter in that plantar flexion. And then, again, as you can imagine, CFL will probably get a little bit tighter in both. All three of them, however, are going to get tighter with that inversion of the ankle, again, because this is the lateral ankle. Next, we're going to talk about the medial ankle ligaments, which I'm happy to tell you it gets even easier. All right, we're back, and I hope my phone doesn't die because we're just about done. All right, so the medial ankle. Here we're going to draw my tibia. We come down here, and see, this is where it gets a little bit tough talking about medial and lateral, just because I feel like my illustrations kind of look the same for whether I'm drawing the tibia or the fibula. This is the medial ankle. I can't forget that. All right, so we come down here to the medial ankle, and surprise, surprise, it involves pretty much the same bones. The talocrural joint still involves the tibia and the fibula over here, and the talus. The subtalar joint involves the talus. I feel like I said talus. Kind of funny in that last time. The subtalar joint involves the talus and the calcaneus. And then, of course, up here we have our navicular and a whole bunch of the other ones. Again, I got to refresh myself before we have further discussions about kind of the intrinsic foot muscles and ligaments, but we will get there. For now, just kind of keeping it more to the ankle. All right, so 2 real big ligaments to talk about. One of them bigger than the other. First of all, we have the deltoid ligament. Called such because, deltoid, delta, little delta looks like that, big delta looks like that, deltoid looks like that. A deltoid is something with 3 sides. So it just looks like a big triangular shaped ligament that has a big, broad kind of distribution across, the calcaneus, navicular. I will have to kind of check up and see. It looks like it sort of disperses and blends evenly across, pretty wide range. So yeah, let me write that down. Deltoid ligament. Okay, next we have the posterior talotibial ligament. Make sure I'm right there. Yep, posterior talotibial ligament. All right, so that's pretty quick and dirty. That's about it for that. So this expansive deltoid ligament is a pretty big reason for why lateral ankle sprains are a whole lot more common than medial ankle sprains. Also, the medial malleolus is a little bit more prominent than the lateral malleolus, and so that also plays a role in helping to stabilize that side of the joint. posterior talotibial ligament. I haven't really, it's not like I'm a huge clinical authority, so I really don't have much to say about it. I haven't heard much about it. Just be aware it's there. But yeah, so I feel like a good point to make right here is in answering the question, are these ligaments the only thing supporting these structures in and about the foot? The answer is no. We also always have dynamic tension and support provided by muscle tendons. They are so important in and around the foot and ankle, especially in sports and athletic rehab and just functional movement in everyday life. These tendons, which as we talked about earlier, Tom, Dick, and Harry, the tibialis posterior tendon, the flexor digitorum tendon, and the flexor hallucis longus tendon also swoop down and swoop beneath the foot or the arch of the foot, and play a role in helping to support not only this these medial ankle joints, but also the arch of the foot. So I just wanted to put that in there. Don't forget that those tendons exist and that they play an important structural role, just like those fibularis longus and brevis tendons play structural roles on the lateral side of the ankle. Don't forget that tendons can also, I shouldn't say they can, they do play important structural roles. And so that explains why the structural integrity, the stability of some joints is, it can be it can be reduced. Stability of joints can be reduced with any kind of muscle injury as a result of losing some of that stability. Okay, I think that's all I wanted to cover on this. If I think of anything else to add, I will let you know. I will also see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. I hope that this was helpful.